Welcome back to Captains of Industry. Still with me in studio, Luke Mckend. He's Country Manager, Google South Africa. My husband loves Street View. He's forever looking up at different addresses, be it his parents that live in Plettenberg Bay, and surveying the street and obviously the outside wall of the property. How is South Africa responding? Some may be concerned that there could be criminal activity that may come into the fold. Have you had such criticism?
We haven't actually in South Africa received that kind of feedback. Typically the feedback is more surprise and in some cases sheer amazement that we've actually reached into the far corners of the South African hinterland that we have. And I must admit, when I grew up in Palabora, a place called Palabora, which is quite far north from here, when I discovered that I could see the home that I grew up in the small town in far northern South Africa, I was absolutely blown away.
And actually zoom into your street.
Well, I hasten to add, not much more is visible than would normally be visible from the street itself. But yes, it's for a lot of people, I think it's been a bit of a nostalgia trip. For others, it's an opportunity to find out where they're going on their next commute. And I've used it frequently since I got back to Johannesburg, just to orientate myself in some cases and figure out what should a place look like when I get there. And that's been quite a useful addition to one of the the tools that we have.
Do you see the product having further traction?
Well, we're always trying to improve it, and we're always adding bits and pieces more. So, for instance, we recently added features from the winelands in and around Stellenbosch. So, literally, you have a bicycle with the Street View technology cycling around the vineyards, just to give people a different perspective of some of the South African landscape.
Moving on to YouTube now, Google acquired YouTube back in 2006, just as you joined the company, for $1.65 billion US. How is that tie-up working, and are the synergies being extricated?
I think so. I think what we're seeing is that more and more content that's being consumed online, particularly as internet connectivity grows and becomes faster, is of a richer nature. It's a richer experience than it used to be. I think maybe 10 years ago, the odd flat website with a few images, well, nobody's really satisfied with that anymore. What we're looking for is something that's a bit more immediate, that conveys more of the message that we're looking for, whether it's entertainment or just a compelling advert. And what we can see, not just in South Africa, but literally globally, is that YouTube is providing an opportunity for literally everyone to become a publisher. And there's some phenomenal things happening in Africa at the moment. So I don't know if you've come across the phenomenon of Zonto dancing.
Not yet, but I'm sure
not something I was aware of, but there are currently, out of Ghana, a number of user-generated videos that are accruing hundreds of thousands of views globally for this phenomenon called the Zonto dancing.
You bring us to the user-generated content, and we've got to look at the Arab Spring and where we're going with this user-generated content. Is it going to completely revolutionize the communication sphere?
I think to a large extent, not just looking at YouTube, but if you look at some of the real-time communication mechanisms that exist, if you think, for instance, of Twitter, how easy it is to update your status, whether you're using a social network like Facebook or Google+, it's incredibly easy to do that sort of thing. And as a result, it already has changed people's expectations of how they receive information. I think there's an expectation that you receive information almost immediately. When the tsunami happened in Japan a short while ago, some of the video content was available on YouTube almost immediately, and it wasn't the news networks that were carrying it. These were videos taken from people's phones. And if you think about the technology that exists in most people's pockets through whatever phone they carry these days, virtually everybody has the ability to snap a photo, to take some video, or just to post a comment online pretty much instantaneously. And I think the revolution to that extent, in terms of changing the way people behave and how they communicate, it's almost already there.
Let's chat a bit about the IPO environment. Apple springs to mind, and of course Facebook, nothing but disappointing for many. Do you think that this blue sky is overhyped when it comes to IPOs in the tech space?
Look, I think it's, I was in the UK during the dot-com crash, and I was with a business at the time that lost 30% of its staff overnight, literally within 2 days.
This was in 2000?
It was about 2000, 2001, yes. It was a US-based business, and it happened very, very quickly. So I have a little experience in terms of how these bubbles can pop. I'm not sure we're in exactly the right place, the same place at the moment. The business environment isn't exactly the same. However, it is always important, as with any business, to look at the fundamentals and try and understand a bit more about where the value really is right now, but where that value will come from in the future. So I suppose, I look at businesses that we advise, and for most of them, the question is, how can we help you reach your customer, and how can we help you improve your bottom line? And a business that isn't asking those questions is usually perhaps not as focused on the kind of things that matter to shareholders as they could be.
Having survived the dot-com bubble bursting, do you think, perhaps I rephrase the question, are we moving back towards a bubble in tech?
I'm not so sure that's the case. I think, if you look at the cautionary tales of IPOs recently, it's pretty clear that investors will probably be a bit more cautious, a bit more sanguine about the kind of investments that they make. And I think that's going to result in a sort of a natural cautiousness, if you like, when it comes to investing in tech and internet-based businesses.
When it comes to search engine marketing, who is your closest competitor? I suppose it differs territory to territory.
I think it's really interesting if you think about the competitive landscape that Google occupies. I think the way we tend to look at it is it's not just about talking to people about search engine marketing per se, but it's about what is your general objective with all of your marketing spend, and how does Google actually play into the relationship, for instance, with television? How do you utilize radio? And what's the role of digital within that kind of context? I think 4 or 5 years ago, people would think about their digital activities in a silo, as a one thing that they have to do, perhaps as an afterthought. Whereas what we're finding now is that digital is much more of a line that runs all the way through the thinking around how to reach your audience.
Do you think that companies have truly integrated communication campaigns?
We're on the way there. And there are a few that do this incredibly well. Even in South Africa, you'll see people who have fantastic above-the-line campaigns that are translated into wonderful digital experiences as well. There are a number of different examples, but I think it's happening, but perhaps not quite as fast as we'd like.
On Captains of Industry, we take the time to get to know the man behind the business. So perhaps we can introduce you to South Africa. And we know that you've moved recently from the UK. You've got a 6-year-old daughter.
Yes.
And with your partner, how are you settling down in Johannesburg?
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I think my wife, who is English, has perhaps found it a little more challenging than one would have expected. But the wonderful thing about Joburg is that it's actually an incredibly friendly place. It has huge diversity, and what we've discovered is that people are very ready and open to meet new people, and we've really enjoyed that.
Luke, your leadership style within the company, obviously now you're dealing with young, innovative, passionate people. How have you got to tailor your leadership style to keep them passionate and innovative?
It's quite an interesting environment. I think, I was having this discussion with someone this morning where we were discussing how do you work with people who are at the same time incredibly ambitious, perhaps haven't worked for 10 or 20 years in industry like a number of others, but still want to grow as fast as possible. And a lot of the time, I think the trick is to just get out of the way. Create the space for these people to succeed. And
we're talking about Generation Y babies. Is that what you deal with on a regular basis?
You're talking about people who are between the ages of, say, 25 and 35, all of whom are very good at what they do. And I think my role, certainly as a manager of people, is to create the space for each of the people in my team to be the best they can be in their role.
Is there a level of accountability with that autonomy?
Oh, absolutely. And Google culture is very open in that respect. It's important to have measurable objectives. It's important to understand what's actually required, but at the same time create a little bit of space for creativity. And I'd like to believe we get the balance right. Not always every quarter, but it's important to do that. And that's what hopefully helps a team flourish, is create that balance of accountability and freedom to innovate and create.
Ultimately, what are you hoping to achieve with your Africa aspirations?
I think right now what we're likely to be able to do is hopefully lay the foundations for a thriving internet economy in Africa. In South Africa, you can already see how that's coming to bear to a certain extent. You know, we have pure play online retail businesses, for instance. We have insurers who've embraced the internet, some of whom's ads you can't avoid. And I think what we'd like to see is not just an economic internet, but an internet that's also been used for entertainment, for education, for health purposes. And with what we're doing in Africa at the moment, I'm fairly confident that within the next few years, we'll be able to see how more people can benefit in a more broad-based way.
Do you see yourself at Google South Africa for the longer term, as long as IT allows?
Oh, absolutely. I think there are very few roles in any company that I think give the opportunity to have a real impact on the community you work within. And Google is certainly one of those companies that provides that opportunity. I can't imagine going anywhere else at this stage.
Recently, I interviewed Dimension Data, Derek Wilcox, the CEO of Dimension Data South Africa and EMEA. Obviously the big focus at Dimension Data is cloud computing right now and getting everybody to migrate to that platform. Do you touch on it?
We do have a number of products that provide for cloud computing from a business point of view. So we have the Google Apps Suite, which have a whole range of collaboration tools that enable people to share documents, write documents, all whilst online using a browser. It's very much a key part of how I think business, and in particular small businesses, can accelerate their growth without incurring the cost.
Is it undoubtedly the next wave, and we all need to become affair with it?
Do you know what? I think we're probably all involved in cloud computing, whether we know it or not. If you've ever used a music streaming service, if you've ever watched a video on YouTube, you're actually using cloud computing. It's a service that you've accessed online, and it may not be for business purposes, but for personal and entertainment purposes, you've almost certainly been a client of a cloud computing service.
Well, there's my IT education for the day. Luke, thanks so much for your time. Luke Mckend, the country manager for Google South Africa. That's it for this week's edition of Captains of Industry. Until next time, from myself, Bronwyn Nieslen, goodbye.